Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Labella Associates, dedicated to the pursuit of partnership for more than 40 years, offering services in the development of buildings, infrastructure, environmental, and energy projects. Labella, powered by partnership. LabellaPC.com.
From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Our connection this hour was made last September when the Rochester Police Accountability Board released reports on 31 cases of alleged police misconduct. The PAB found that of those 31 complaints, 22 involved instances of officers being either discourteous, failing to act, or using unnecessary force. The PAB redacted the names of the officers involved, but referred to its suggested disciplinary matrix. The PAB does not have formal disciplinary authority after a court ruled against them in 2020 and again several years later. And yet, even the release of those reports last year was controversial. The City of Rochester attorney warned the PAB not to do it. The city attorney said last fall that releasing these reports ran afoul of the PAB's charter and the law and could invite a lawsuit. Well, the Rochester Police Union, the Locust Club, did file suit, and last week a state Supreme Court judge sided with the Locust Club, the police union, and against the PAB, effectively stripping the PAB of almost all of its authority. As my colleague Gino Fanelli reports, quote, a ruling in state Supreme Court will leave the Rochester Police Accountability Board unable to investigate police misconduct. The police union had argued the police oversight agency violated civil service law by releasing the reports publicly. The judge sided with the Locust Club with his decision, stating that the agency's activities violated the state's Taylor Law, which governs public employee unions. His ruling strips a slew of powers from the board. Among them are the ability to investigate claims of misconduct, both independently or because of a civilian complaint, its power to subpoena officers and witnesses, and its ability to establish a disciplinary matrix, which would guide how Rochester police are disciplined. It also blocks the PAB's access to internal information from the department, including databases, personnel files, and body-worn camera footage. The ruling allows for the PAB to do two things. It can exist, and it can review and recommend changes to department policy, end quote. And Gino's reporting quotes the judge, Judge Waldorf, saying, the PAB has been stripped of any express or implied statutory powers relating to its investigation or disciplinary-related activities concerning RPD officers. The PAB cannot thereafter cloak its unlawful conduct as being merely advisory or non-binding when it seeks to compel police union members to attend alleged misconduct investigation hearings through so-called officer statement requests and subpoenas carrying contempt power, end quote. This really is a mess. It could be a disaster for the PAB, which could be left with very little authority and a $3.6 million budget. The city of Rochester had 30 days to decide whether to appeal this decision at all. But the courts have not been favorable to the PAB, and the future of the organization is now in serious question. So this hour, let's explore what we know about what happened and what could happen next. My guests include the Executive Director of the Rochester Police Accountability Board, Lesli Myers-Small, back with us. Thank you for making time for the program today.
Thank you, as always, Evan.
The Chair of the PAB is Larry Knox. Larry, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Evan.
Gino Fanelli is Investigations and City Hall reporter for WXXI News. Thank you for helping steer the ship this hour, sir.
I'm happy to be here.
And on a future program, I want to just put this right out into the universe. We certainly would love to sit down with Paul Dondorfer. We'd love to sit down with the Locust Club and fully understand their perspective, not only on this decision, but on a number of issues related to policing in this community. We all know this community has been in a big spotlight, a national spotlight recently. So that invitation is out there, and we'll see if we can do that soon here. But this hour, it's a chance to understand from that PAB perspective what this all means. And I will start, Lesli, when we talked last year about why you were releasing these reports, what we know at the time was that your organization felt like the public needed to see this, that you'd been working, in some cases to go back years, that they deserved to see it, that you would redact the officers' names, and you felt like that there was precedent in other cities to release these reports. We also know the city attorney advised you not to do this, felt like this was a mistake, felt like it ran afoul of the law. Do you think it was a mistake in retrospect?
So, Evan, I just want to add one part to that. While we do have the general counsel of Patrick Beath, we also have outside counsel that is approved, and that's the esteemed T. Andrew Brown, who was a former general counsel for the city of Rochester, former president of the New York Bar Association, and he did an extensive legal review, which outlined that we could do this. So this wasn't about feeling or working hard. Certainly, we have worked hard, but we went through an extensive legal review with T. Andrew Brown. So I just want to make sure that that's clear.
Okay, but do you feel like it was a mistake to release those reports?
I don't. Based on the legal review that we received, based on the fact that we're about accountability and transparency, based on the fact that our 75% of our public through the referendum in 2019 said so, we felt we had legal standing to do so.
Now, the appeal, a possible appeal here, is up to the city of Rochester. Now, their counsel had warned you not to do this. And I wonder if you expect them to appeal on your behalf now. They've got a 30-day window to do that. Why would they appeal after they told you, don't do this, and you did this? Should they appeal for you?
Well, I conferred with our attorney. We are working with John Mancuso. Because, again, you've mentioned around general counsel and the potential for conflict of interest. I spoke to our general counsel, and he said it would be appropriate to share that an appeal has been filed.
An appeal has been filed?
Yes.
Okay. Do we know what the timeline should be then? On what do they expect to get a decision then? I mean, like, I understand the courts don't. We're not going to see one tomorrow here.
Correct.
But the city is putting together its budget. The city is going to have to figure out, council, the mayor's office, if the PAB is going to have authority going forward and if it's worth continuing to invest in. My guess is an appeal could still take a while, though, right?
Appeals do take time.
Yeah.
Yes, they do. Weeks, months.
Mm-hmm. So not next week, not before the end of a budget. Okay. Let me ask Larry the same question. Then I'm very curious to know how Gino's reporting, how he sees some of these recent steps here. But Larry, do you think any mistakes were made last fall when the PAB decided we're going to put these reports out to the public?
No.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit more about why you think it was not a mistake?
Yeah, I was just answering the first question succinctly.
Yeah, that's fair. That was the same.
I don't. I think this is the will of the people. And I will say some of the, neither of us at the table are lawyers, but some of the issues that the Corporation Council had was because of a lawsuit the city had that was waiting to hear. They're waiting to get a decision back from I think the Supreme Court on. I can't remember which level of the court system it was. And it was a decision they lost. A lawsuit they had then with the NYCLU was also part of that in regards to what could go up online in regards to records. So part of his caution was, we have this lawsuit. We want you to wait. And we felt it was clear in the law that that was not a lawsuit that should stop us from putting that up. The city and Corporation Council ended up losing that lawsuit. So I think that was part of his reasoning in regards to having us wait. But, after the decision came out from the Court of Appeals last year, and which was a very detailed decision, we felt it was very clear from that the work that we did in regards to investigations, those going up, was in regards to the decision that it was fair, in regards to what the public wanted, that was fair.
So you're surprised at the state Supreme Court's decision last week?
The Supreme Court justice's decision. It wasn't the whole.
Okay. The justice's decision surprised you.
Yeah, I was surprised by it, but that's why we're appealing it.
Okay, and I want to make sure. I'm going to also put on my not a lawyer hat. When you say you use passive language, the decision is being appealed. Is the city of Rochester appealing this decision?
Yes.
Who is appealing?
Yes, it's on behalf. We are a part of the city of Rochester.
I know. I just want to make sure that I do understand all the legal mechanisms. So the city of Rochester is appealing.
Yes.
You're breaking that news right here. Okay. Gino, before we kind of look forward here, because there's a lot of different eventualities here. If they win their appeal, it's a very different deal for the PAB. If they do not, it's going to be a very hard road. What stands out to you, Gino?
Well, a lot of things. I think that if you look at the history of what happened here, long before the PAB was even formed, going back to 2018 when the proposal from Lesli Warren was being put up, where she had kind of dueling proposal of what the PAB would look like. This was always a concern. That was the concern that Warren had at the time, that putting disciplinary power would eventually cause, it would be struck down by the courts and would strip further power away from it. The PAB was formed to replace the Civilian Review Board, which was an advisory body made up of volunteers that reviewed cases that went through the professional standards section of our PD and made recommendations on, what they think happened. If the appeal goes through and the PAB loses, it effectively has less power than the thing that it replaced had. The CRB was at least able to look over police discipline actions and make advisory judgments on it. That wouldn't really be the case anymore. Effectively, if this Supreme Court ruling, Justice's decision stands, the PAB would be relegated to largely an advisory body on policy overall. So I look at the referendum in 2019 that created the PAB and what people voted for then and what was proposed then, and that is not what people voted for. And what we end up with is something that is a watered down would be an understatement of what was voted for at the time. When the referendum was put up, and 3/4 of the voters that voted in it approved a PAB with investigatory and disciplinary powers.
So what people voted for by a 3-1 margin in 2019 is not going to be what they get based on this decision.
Arguably, it's not what they're getting now.
Because
after the appellate court stripped the disciplinary powers, that's not what people voted for. And granted, if the court makes that decision, you have to go with what the court says, but it is kind of a reality of what people wanted and what people voted for and what they're going to end up getting as a result of these court rulings they're very different things.
Before I look ahead, let me ask the executive director of the PAB one other question about the decision to release the reports. I certainly understand a desire for transparency, and I understand a desire to make sure the public knows what have you been doing. As Gino reported for years, the PAB took some time to get moving. There was some, I think, a little bit of public trust lost for a few years.
Just a little.
Okay. I'm euphemizing, right? So, number one, you want to restore public trust. We're working. We're doing investigations. Number two, I understand you feel that the public deserves to see them. But did you think that it was possible to achieve some of what you wanted to achieve by not releasing to the public some of the results, but still working privately to achieve some of your goals? In other words, could you have done these investigations and said, hey, we don't need to release them publicly. We will take the advice of the city attorney, but we can still use these privately to try to achieve what we think should happen, which is encouraging some kinds of discipline, encouraging perhaps sometimes policy change. You don't think you could have done that without releasing publicly?
But that's what we were doing, Evan.
Okay.
Right? We were advising the chief when our investigators conducted the investigations, reviewed the body-worn camera footage, reviewed internally, went to a panel review. We make all of those recommendations to the chief. So that is what we were doing. We really felt like we had the law on our side. And what Larry was referencing was New York Civil Liberty Union versus the city of Rochester relative to the fact that police records are public, right? So here's the thing that is so fascinating is that if you wanted to foil the records, you could get them and you could post them online.
But now the court is saying you, as the PAB,
cannot,
you can't.
But you can.
You can't. Okay. So all of the reasons that you described make it a situation where you don't view this as sort of a metaphorical own goal, that this wasn't a mistake. You didn't slip on a banana peel here. You didn't injure your own cause. You think we did what we needed to do, and the courts are going to have to then decide. Is that where you are?
Absolutely. We operated what we believe to be good faith and sound, certainly legal advice. And this is why the matter is in the courts.
And reading, as Gino reported, some of what Justice Waldorf was saying, I want to go back to some of that, Gino. The justice was saying, quote, the PAB cannot therefore cloak its unlawful conduct as being merely advisory or non-binding when it seeks to compel police union members to do certain things. In other words, the PAB can't say, look, we don't have disciplinary power. We're just making suggestions here. Even the justice seems to be saying, that's not good enough. You can't make police do anything. You can't make them show up for an interview. You can't make them release body-worn camera footage just because you're just making suggestions here. That seems to be what he's saying.
Yeah, my interpretation of it was essentially that they were saying that anything you're doing in the pursuit of compelling any kind of discipline, even if you don't have the direct power itself, would be covered under the previous appellate court ruling. That was my read of what he was saying. And I don't know. When I'm thinking of the release of the investigatory reports, which I covered at the time, and it was really, to me, it seems like in a rock and a hard place situation for the PAB, where I'm looking at from the lens of public perception too. If you don't release anything, well, you get a bunch of people yelling, "What are you doing? You don't get to see anything. You're not being transparent.
Yeah, what are we paying for?" Yeah.
And you do release them, and then you end up with a legal battle. But it's also a legal battle that's somewhat necessary. It was going to happen one way or the other. The Locust Club was never going to back down from trying to. They've been opposed to the very concept of the PAB from the very, very beginning.
Yes.
So this was kind of a natural outcome, I would say, of putting them in a position where they see an opportunity to file another lawsuit.
Well, let me ask our guests about that. Lesli, do you feel like you've made any? Well, I just want to ask you to characterize your relationship, perhaps, with the police union.
Mm-hmm. So the police union, it's non-existent.
There is no relationship.
There is no relationship. I have to say that my relationship with the chief is very positive and it's very encouraging. We meet monthly, and we were working through some of these issues, and even when we received the ruling that we could redact or unredact, right, show the names of law enforcement officers, we talked through it. He said, Dr. Myers-Small, I'm not necessarily in agreement with this, but, we will comply with the law. So we problem solve together, we brainstorm, and we have a very positive relationship. But in any type of organization, and, same thing when I was superintendent, what the union and that role is different from the actual individuals who are a part of the union. But I have a very collaborative relationship with Chief Smith.
Okay. Larry, how would you characterize relationships with police union? I mean, I know I'm asking two different things there in a sense, but...
Well, I'm a union member. I mean, my day job, I work for a union. So I understand unions advocating
You and I have talked for years about labor issues.
Yeah.
Does this feel like a different category of labor issues to you? The police union?
I mean, police labor issues are often different, the priorities they have, than other labor unions. But I will say that I get them advocating for their members. That's what they're paying their dues for. But the city, my role as chair, the people that work at the PAB, the city council, which we're under, which unanimously supports this appeal and the work of the PAB. We are about the will of what got passed, and there's been legal challenges. We haven't won them all, but that Court of Appeals ruling from last year took away the disciplinary power. But the work that we've been doing since then and the subsequent ruling from the NYCLU, I think, show that the work of putting the reports up, showing the work that's happening, taking in the complaints, engaging with the public, around the policy stuff, working closely with the chief, working closely with city council, on all these issues, on the investigative reports, is what the public wanted, and I think what the court decision last year gave us breath to do. I mean, so of course the union disagrees with that, and we'll go through that legal process. But what the community wanted and what the electeds, the mayor, the city council are supporting, along with the community members and the alliance, which helped put this together. These are all things that, they're united in. They don't agree on everything all the time. This is one thing they're united in, and that this is the work that they expect us to do.
One other point to try to be fair here. Again, the Locust Club is not here today. I really hope we can bring them in soon. And one thing that Paul Dondorfer has said, among other complaints about the PAB, to Gino's point, their complaints have been from the very beginning.
Very beginning, yes.
From the very beginning. But in this case, some of what Dondorfer said was essentially this, that the reports that you released were based on an incomplete picture of investigations and cases. And what Dondorfer has repeatedly said is that he's an investigator by trade. So he said, if I went into court one day on a case and tried to form a picture that was as incomplete as what the PAB is releasing to the public. He said he'd have been laughed out of court. And so the PAB ought not be releasing reports that are so incomplete as to paint unfair pictures of officers, even if their names are redacted. What do you make of that?
So this goes back to the qualifications and experience of those who are completing the investigations. And this is actually something that I've had a really robust conversation with Chief Smith about. Our investigators go through extensive training. They came to the job with extensive training, rather. We have been trained in the past. When I started, we had current law enforcement officials, retired law enforcement issues who have trained our investigators. And we were actually in the process of looking at the training that Rochester Police Department receives to see if that's something that we might include in our repertoire. We were headed down that path. So, with all due respect, they are not aware of the training that we have received. I don't think they've ever looked into it. And, we'd be very happy to show what type of credentialed training that happens locally, statewide, and nationally that we've received.
But set the training aside, the reports themselves. Don Dorfer was saying, those are incomplete. You should not put those out to the public. That's irresponsible. What do you think?
I guess I would want to ask, what does he mean by the fact that they're incomplete? Incomplete with not having what? We are reviewing body-worn camera footage. We have, the complaints that have come in from community members. We conduct interviews. I think the only thing that certainly is missing, and this is their choice, is that law enforcement, even though we have asked them to come and talk to us, they've been instructed by the union not to come. So that piece is missing, but everything else.
So you're saying it's a pretty effective game to say, we're not going to show up to talk to you. And then when you later put out the report, say, well, you didn't get our perspective, so it's incomplete. That's how that feels.
Correct.
Okay.
It is. And it's not to bash, right? But it's a matter of we want to hear the law enforcement officer's perspective, right? But and so that was also what was a little difficult. We have not, with Judge Waldorf's decision, we've never had an interview with an officer. So,
And I think if you look at the reports that when they were posted online, folks had complaints. They weren't 99%. The board, got recommendations from investigators or the review panels were like, oh yes, we agree with everything that the person alleged. Mm-hmm. Often, I would think the majority of the time, it wasn't a serious felony-like complaint that we affirmed. It was very fair. I mean, there were things that were alleged that happened and that the board agreed with, and other things that we didn't, or there wasn't enough information to justify. I mean, the one thing that I think our most consistent complaint that's always affirmed is the body cam footage not being done properly, which is kind of an obvious thing. But I would say, looking at the reports, there isn't, any indication that I've seen from the work that's been done in sitting on these panels. I know because when I sit on these with my fellow board members that we have a bias of just trying to find something to get an officer on. That's not what's happening. And I think, the public and council and others would have pointed that out if they saw in those reports some kind of, impetus to go after, police in an unfair manner in regards to our recommendations.
I think that's important, Larry, because what the Locust Club always says, if not always, often, that we're just a bunch of activists who are anti-law enforcement. And that could be so far from the truth. This is about viewing the information and the data that we have to make a fair, unbiased decision. And as Chair Knox said, there are some of the complaints, right, that come forward that are not substantiated, right? Or they say, no, the officer was acting in their role and responsibility, and so therefore it's not sustained. It's not always that we sustain the charge or charges.
Gino, you've read reports. Do they seem significantly incomplete to you?
Not particularly. I mean, they're investigatory findings, and they're they're not going to show literally every single aspect that went into the. It's a report. It's not entire research document. So they don't seem particularly incomplete. I think there's kind of a. It's kind of difficult to take on face value what Don Dorfer is saying there because, as Lesli has said, that they already have the preperception that the PAB is an anti-police biased organization. no matter what they do and no matter what they put out, do you think anyone from the Locust Club is ever going to say, like, love them or hate them, this is a great document? Like, they're not going to do that. So it's always going to be, we think this is illegal, and also what they did put out was not good enough. And it begs the question, if it's an incomplete picture, why not contribute in some way? Why not have those conversations? Why not do the interviews and show the complete picture? Why did the city have to fight? Did we have to have a court case fighting with NYCLU to release the police discipline documents? Why did we have to do all of this if it's always, there's nothing here, it's nothing to look at? It's just very frustrating that it's speaking out of both sides of your mouth when it comes to things like that.
Now, I would add just, PSS, if they get a complaint, they also share that with us, or have had, many, and this shouldn't be a surprise to folks, it may be, we get many complaints that don't go to PSS. So for the community to feel, where do I have a safe space, where do I feel comfortable doing a complaint against an officer that I felt they did something wrong, that's us. And then we share those, and that's shared with the chief, shared with RPD. So that's stuff they wouldn't even have known about, because that person was not going to call the RPD because of the trust issue that we're trying to help improve in this community without the PAB existing. So as we talk about building better community relationship, police and community relationships, us being there to take these complaints in, to work in a productive manner with RPD to address either a policy issue, if it's something that's more widespread, or something very specific with a particular complaint, we're there being the advocate for that person who has that complaint, or maybe even explaining back to them when they get the answer, about why their complaint was only partially affirmed, here's why, and there's a better understanding of that. That was something that was not happening before. That was not something that was not transparent before. So that's another added, value, and something that the citizens wanted and the elected supported in regards to our work that, I think is a little lost sometimes.
A little bit of context. My colleague Julie Williams sends this, referring to the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. There are PABs in 38 states plus D.C. Some states have multiple. California has the highest number, 24 different PAB organizations. And police oversight bodies tend to be limited in power under most state laws, according to the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. Police departments are able to control the oversight body's access to the data, evidence, witnesses, and personnel files in a number of states. So these kind of battles are happening in a lot of places. It's now front and center in New York State. At the core of this is the question of whether the police should be allowed to investigate the police, and whether we trust police to investigate police. And the citizens of this city decided in 2019 that they think there should be an outside body, not to try to rig the system against the police, but just to investigate, to say, hey, we're going to take a look here. And the question now becomes, what happens next? Because if you lose this appeal, what do you have left? What can you do?
So I think that's the $1 million question, and that's something that I don't think people realize. They just think about investigations. And with all due respect to what Gino said, what we're kind of reduced down to, policy oversight, right, and looking at the patterns and practices of law enforcement, I think are incredibly important. So we're still able to do that. Like if we start to see a pattern, we can make recommendations not only to the chief, but to city council, to the mayor, et cetera. We also, and that's another $1 million question. We've been able to pivot and use those individuals who are investigators to do more policy and oversight work, because I completely honor and recognize that taxpayer money is at play here, and that we don't have staff that are just sitting around. So that pivot has happened, and the investigators will be doing that work. Additionally, we know that our community, it's important for our community to be informed and to know what their rights are as it relates to law enforcement, right? So if you get pulled over at a traffic stop, what are your rights? If you are stopped, right, you're walking and an officer comes up to you and questions you, what do you need to answer? What shouldn't you answer? People need to be informed and educated about that. Additionally, we have a whole group of young people, right, that need to have that type of information. So we know that knowledge and information is power. And so we're doubling down on our community engagement. interactions and working with individuals who might not have access to this information readily. So that's still an important and powerful component of what we do. And we can still take complaints. We just can't investigate them. But remember, a complaint comes in, and if we start to see a pattern, then it goes over to oversight, policy and oversight.
Okay, what your budget is 3.6, correct? $3.6 million. How many people do you employ?
We have 28.
How many are investigators?
So we have 6 investigators and 2 digital forensic analysts.
And you're going to keep them on staff if you lose this appeal and try to keep a full $3.6 million budget?
We haven't even gone there yet. I'm saying
Okay.
right now, while we're in the waiting period.
You're still trying to work, trying to be effective
Correct.
for the community. I do understand that.
Yes.
Can you make a case that if you lose this appeal, your budget and staff should not be cut?
I think that's something that we first need to look at internally, have conversations with the board. But I get that we might have to pivot and move in some different directions. But I don't want to put any fear or concern out there right now. I also don't want to ignore that there are certain realities that exist out there. But right now, we're in a period where we can focus our efforts a little bit more on the oversight and developing policy. So right now, I feel very confident with that, Evan. But as we move towards the future, we certainly would need to have intense conversations to determine next steps.
Policy and oversight. I think that it was a key mission of the PAB when it when it was put into the charter and when it was created. Policy and oversight was a key part of it. A report hasn't come out of policy and oversight since fall of last year, and it also is one of those things where it's a finite number. Like, there's only so many policies that you can actually address and investigate until you run out of the pool. You can go through every single general order, and eventually you run out. So the big difference that concerns me here is focusing it solely a policy and oversight organization is once you take investigations out of the picture, which investigations can always happen. There's always going to be new things that come across. Policy and oversight, the well runs dry eventually. And it's a concern that I've heard many, many times that if you keep going down that road and keep doing that, eventually you're just doing reports to justify your existence. And that's, I think, a concern if it becomes solely a policy and oversight organization, is you end up hitting that hurdle. Again, that might not happen, but if it does, there's only so much you can do in policy and oversight. And how many people are actually working on the reports in policy and oversight right now?
So we have 1, 2, 3, 4.
So 4 of the 28 staffers?
Yes.
And
Okay.
And let me also give Leslie and Larry, here's what I'll do. I want to ask him a follow-up to Gino's point. Then after we take our break, I've got some emails that I think go to people's questions about, well, if not this, then what? Like the 2019 vote was a 3-1 vote. The city residents were very clear in what they thought they
Sure.
were voting for. So before we do that, to Gino's point about policy and oversight versus individual case investigations, I want to just ask, if we saw another case, let's say you lose this appeal and now you're in the policy oversight world sort of exclusively, and we get a case like this, 2021 New York Times headline. I mean, we obviously covered it in WXXI, but I'm sharing the New York Times headline because this became a national story. Rochester officers suspended after pepper spraying of a 9-year-old girl. Everyone knows that story. If a case like that happened in the future, what could you do without not only disciplinary power, but investigatory power? Would you be involved at all?
So certainly we could take the complaint. I think the other component that's important here, and it goes to, again, the policy work, is this a part of a bigger practice, right? What particular general order does it correlate to? And are we regularly seeing this particular general order being violated? I think also just the fact that we have a very vibrant community, and I said this the other night after our board meeting, our community has a right to know. So while they might not be able to go to us, if we have done our job in the community engagement and public affairs area, that our community knows, wait a minute, we need to have conversations. We need to write our city council, right? We need to flood the chief of police office, right? There's a lot of work, again, that I would counter that we can still do. While we cannot investigate it, there are other things that we can do, that we can get folks to activate other entities that can make a difference and that can that can move this incident forward.
What entities would those be?
Like I said, city council, right? Writing, reaching out even to our state delegation to call the question. There's a lot that they can do on the elected official side, right? But part of the problem is when we have inactivity, and if people just don't know who they need to go to or what they need to do, that's problematic, and that's part of our job specifically relative to law enforcement.
I would add, for the work, we're an agency that's under city council. So that work that we do, when we do these reports, when they have or they direct questions to us, that goes back to them and informs their work. So then when they are talking, let's say in the public safety committee, or when they're talking to the chief or the mayor or anybody else engaged with the RPD, our work informs some of that discussion. So the reports that we do, it goes out to the community, but it also goes to council. And sometimes the work in those reports is based off questions maybe council had, where their staff, they don't have the, we're there to do that work on their behalf. So a lot of the work, even with, the changes in protest policy, there were changes made to general orders after that.
Yeah.
If another complaint comes in and council's like, wait a minute, this report from PAB outlined these suggestions and these changes were taken out of that. And sometimes they take what we suggest, sometimes they don't. And then whatever was, put into place by RPD was not addressed was not, followed properly. That's a concern. And that's part of the work that we're doing. So I think it's, on top of informing the community, making sure the community knows, fully informing council and the mayor, of the outcomes of what we have coming in. Like, city council, if they got 400 people complaining, about RPD process, or that's stuff that we work on. They don't have the capacity of that. That's why this agency was created, to address that outcome of that concern that the community had. And city council said, here, we're going to put you in a place to do that. And that is part of the work on top of the investigations.
We got to get our only break, but to already address a point that's coming in on email, it is impossible to predict the result of this appeal. Mm-hmm. I think our guests in studio did not expect what they saw out of the state Supreme Court justice last week, nor did perhaps they expect to be denied disciplinary power in the courts multiple times over the last 5 years. So who knows where this goes next? We're not trying to report on this as if this is final. We're trying to understand what this justice said, what the police union is saying, what the PAB was created to do, and what it can and can't do right now. So city council has a lot to decide here. Larry's right. PAB exists under council, and council, has its own divisions and ideas on what should happen. We're going to talk on the other side of this break about what comes next. If what? A lot of people are saying, if not this, then what? We'll get your emails. Let me read those when we come back.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from United Way of Greater Rochester and the Finger Lakes, serving the community for more than 100 years, dedicated to creating a future where everyone's basic needs are met so all can thrive. More at unitedwayrocflx.org.
I got a lot of feedback here. Let me work through some of your reactions as we talk about the Rochester Police Accountability Board, the PAB. Gino Fanelli, my colleague, is with us in studio, and Lesli Myers-Small, the executive director of the PAB, is here, and Larry Knox, the chair of the PAB, is here. They tell us this hour that the city of Rochester has decided to appeal the state Supreme Court justice's decision last week, stripping the PAB of investigatory power, leaving the PAB with a lot more narrow authority at all. PAB does not have disciplinary power, and the justice last week said they should not have investigatory power either. So David writes, what a terrible reality this is. Police need to be held to account, and now who will do it? Alex says, if Rochester citizens aren't able to self-determine through a ballot measure or actions by city council, what levers of power exist that the 75% of voters who supported the PAB's formation might use to create independent oversight of police? Again, that's Alex. Lesli, I don't know how to answer that for David and for Alex. They're saying, if not this, then what? I don't know what the other side of this would be.
So, as you mentioned earlier, Evan, we are a vibrant member of NACOL, which is the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. And so, as you mentioned, and you took my thunder just a little bit, this is this is not just a local, this is a national conversation that's happening. And actually, next week, I'll be in New York City on a panel talking about the future of civilian oversight. So, meeting with our national partners, and when the court case, the ruling came through, I reached out, and they've put Rochester on their executive committee agenda. So that's happening this week sometime, and they said they would let us know what the outcome. We need to really make sure that we're working with the oversight bodies in New York, so Albany, New York City, Suffolk County, et cetera, and then also look at it in the tri-state area and nationally to see where are places that have been under attack and they have made improvements. What are the things that they've done to be able to do that? And there's certainly strength in numbers. So that is something that we're looking at, to have those types of conversation within the state. We'll be with our partners next week, but also at the national level to try and get some strategies. And, everything has happened so quickly that we're trying to figure out what are those next steps. That this happened on April 28th. So we're still putting things together, and I think people want us to have answers. We are working on them, and we're not sitting by idly, but it's going to take a little bit of time to figure out what exactly that looks like.
I mean, I think the answer for Alex and David, in part, is what Lesli describes is a situation across the country, essentially, where this question is playing out legally. It's not just in Rochester.
No.
It's not just in Albany. And one of the answers that police unions would give you, where should this go next, is put it back in the hands of police. They feel like they can do this. One of the things the Locust Club, Mike Mazzio, has said to me in the past president of the Locust Club, is that Mike always felt like, why would you not trust police to handle this? Mike said to me, why would we want officers who are behaving dishonorably? We wouldn't allow that. We wouldn't tolerate that. We don't need an outside body to review that. Police will, now I don't want to say I'm speaking for all police. I'm not speaking for every union, but that is certainly what the Locust Club has told us in the past. And that is something that this country is essentially having to decide in many ways, that courts are having to decide. So the answer, Alex and David, is the answer may be that the courts decide that the police are right, that they're going to have the opportunity to continue to examine their own actions, or there may be different kind of decisions coming here. Jim says, I understand different court cases ruled that some PAB actions violate the law or police city labor contracts. What is the path and probability of success in these directions? What might the public best advocate for? I'm a city resident. I voted for the PAB. What should people advocate for right now, Lesli? Larry?
I think certainly a couple things. I think it's so important for folks to just say that in our community, that this matters. Accountability and transparency, right? Really show city council, the mayor, that this is important, and that although the judge's decision was made, that they're not in agreement with what has happened. I think also what's important is for people to really get themselves familiar with what the judge wrote, and we're trying to work on doing like a plain language summary around that so people understand what we can do and what we can't do. That's important too, because I think people think that we're just, again, sitting by idly. But I think it's important for people to lift their voices up and to say that this is unacceptable, that accountability and transparency is really, really important.
Sydney, watching on the WXXI News YouTube channel, says, notice how more rights and accountability are achieved with struggle over time, and then they are gradually chipped away by the court system until the status quo returns. That seems to be the real role of the courts. Is that too cynical, or do you think there's something to that, Larry Nax?
I'm not going to comment on the judge's decision and connect that to what Sydney said. I will say, this is part of a system. You've seen a lot of nationwide fights within the courts regards to what the administration is doing. So if, it's a recourse that people have, it's a recourse that the Locust Club is using. But, I feel really confident, from talking with our staff, talking with, attorneys that, this appeal that the city is supporting, the PAB in and also wants to, engage in is going to be successful.
Yeah, City Hall confirms to us that they are supporting the appeal. We'll see where that goes. Meanwhile, maybe Gino can help with this one. Listener on YouTube says, how much does a FOIL request cost?
Oh, a FOIL request is free, and I encourage everyone to use them. FOIL requests.
Freedom of Information Law.
Freedom of Information Law, and you send a request to the city or whatever government agency you're asking from, whatever you want. You can get internal communications. You can get now you can get disciplinary reports from the department after the NYCLU ruling. They are free. Use them. Use your rights. You have them.
Chris writes about the Taylor Law, which was referred to by the justice. He says, isn't the issue the language of the civil service law, a state law? Why not move to change the law? Larry, Leslie, you want to work on, is that something that should be worked on if that's the concern here?
I mean, I think there's legislative, adjustments that could happen, to depending what happens with the court decisions. I mean, changing state law is definitely not a quick process. And we feel, what the citizens voted in, what was in the charter, what got affirmed after the Court of Appeals decision enables us to do this work without having to change the Taylor Law.
In other words, you think this justice got it wrong. You think you can win on appeal as opposed to saying, look, within the strictures of the state law, we're going to lose here. We got to work on changing the law.
We're appealing the decision. Yeah.
Okay. Let me read Lisa's comment, and then I'll take Ted's call. Lisa says, Evan, I don't understand why you are pressuring the PAB on their decision to release redacted reports when their respected outside counsel, Andrew Brown, advised that was fine. It seems it furthered the purposes of the PAB, accountability. The decision by the trial court judge will be appealed and is not final. However, your analysis suggests it is final. Reporting on the decision is different from assuming it is correct. The trial court decision is unlikely to be upheld, since it appears the issues litigated had already been litigated, and the law does not allow a second bite. I think you needed legal help evaluating this case before reporting on it. That's from Lisa. Lisa, I will always take legal help. Always. I am not a lawyer, and I am very glad to listen to any lawyer who has expertise. I will say, I've tried to stress, and I think Gino's reporting stresses this too, an appeal can be filed. Now, at the time Gino wrote his story last week, the city was still deciding. The city has now decided. They are appealing. So, of course, this is going back to court. I think predicting what the courts will do is not easy to do. I don't think I need to be an expert to say that so far the courts have not really been in favor of the PAB, whether it's on disciplinary power, now investigatory power. But maybe you're right. Maybe the way you read it is correct. Maybe the next step they'll say, look, I don't know what Waldorf was seeing here, but the PAB, you got your investigatory powers back here. So, but I'm not trying to suggest it was final. I don't think, Gino, you were either, right?
No, not at all. I think we've been pretty clear that but it is also a reality that you have to face one way or the other of what happens next, and just avoiding talking about that, what the possibilities are here. It doesn't seem like a service to people either. So
yeah, I don't want people to be caught blind here. If this appeal loses, the PAB is in a very different spot than what voters thought they were signing up for in 2019. Or to Gino's point, maybe it already is, and it gets further narrowed. So you ought to know what could be coming, and I think that's our job, not to try to predict what's coming, but to understand, make sure you understand the different eventualities here.
Yeah, and also it's just important to note that, yes, this would limit the power of the PAB pretty drastically, but the PAB we have right now is not what we voted for in 2019 either. We don't have disciplinary power.
Right.
And that was what was voted for. That was what the voters wanted. It's more similar than what the other outcome is, but it's still not 100% what was approved by the voters.
I will say, without the disciplinary power, that is still one of the most, we have one of the most robust PAB boards in the country. Just to be able to do these public recommendations that the chief has to respond to, that everybody can see. Not everybody has that, even within New York State. So disciplinary power, that was something that didn't get through. But everything else that we have, and that was affirmed by the Court of Appeals last year, is pretty powerful not just in New York State, but across the country.
Well, Lisa says even if the PAB structure was found to prevent public accountability, a new one would have to be created. This community cannot heal mistrust without public transparency, and effective policing cannot happen without the trust of the community. So that's Lisa. And let me get Ted, about 90 seconds left. Go ahead, Ted, keep it tight.
Hey, just first of all, thank you all for releasing those documents and being behind transparency. That's so important in this community. Secondly, disciplinary power isn't dead. Chief Justice Wilson said so in his dissent. We get a movement going. We get state law change. We get that part of the ability of police officers to have discipline be an object of negotiation for their contracts. Then we could get it back. People could set their own disciplinary procedures. So don't give up on it yet. It's still worth fighting for, and it's just another hurdle, and we will prevail. Thanks.
Ted, thank you for the phone call. Leslie, final thoughts from you. What do you want to leave with our audience who is wondering where this will go next?
Thank you, Evan. I think certainly while the court ruling certainly does present a challenge and there's frustration, it really doesn't break our resolve as an agency, right? We are committed and we're doubling down on accountability and transparency. So the need for oversight has not disappeared, as you heard some of the callers or the emails. We're committed to our mission. We're committed to our vision, and we'll fight for transparency, justice, and being in partner with the community. But I do want to say we do need the community to come out and to support and to talk about the fact that this isn't what they voted for, and they'd like to see what they voted for.
Would you all come on in the future with the Locust Club if they will sit down with us?
Absolutely.
Larry, does that sound good? We'll do our best. And but
I will too.
I know you will, Gino. I'm not worried about Gino. Gino says yes to everything. Hey, transparency, dialogue, conversation,
accountability.
Thank you to Lesli Myers-Small, Executive Director of the Rochester Police Accountability Board. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And Larry Knox is the chair of the PAB. Thank you. Gino Fanelli, great work as always. Thanks for helping steer the ship, brother.
Thank you.
More connections coming up.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.